Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Okay, so now, without further ado, we got Jessica Hopper and Josh Kun. Jessica Hopper is a music critic and the author of the first collection of criticism by a living female rock critic. In a career spanning more than 20 years, Hopper has earned acclaim as a provocative, fearless writer on topics ranging from the male myopia of emo music to the ways in which commercial success may have saved indie rock. She was formerly the editorial director at MTV News and an editor at Pitchfork and Rookie. Her essays have appeared in Best Music Writing for 2004, 2005, 2007, 2010, and 2011. And her writing appears in New York Magazine, Rolling Stone, BuzzFeed, and Book Forum, among others. Her book, The Girl's Guide to Rocking, was named one of 2009's notable books for young readers by the American Library Association. And joining her is Josh Kun, who is a 2016 MacArthur Fellow and the winner of a 2018 Berlin Prize. He's the director of the Popular Music Project at USC Annenberg's Norman Lear Center and co-editor of the book series Refiguring American Music. He co-curates Crossfade Lab. He founded the USC Annenberg Distinguished Lecture Series on Latin American Arts and Culture. He serves on the editorial boards of the International Journal of Communication. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this word. Aslan? Did I say that right? Sort of? Aslan. There it is. Sorry. A Journal of Chicano Studies, Journal of Popular Musical Studies, and Public Culture. He's the author of Audiotopia, Music, Race, and America, which won a 2006 American Book Award. Songs in the Key of Los Angeles won a Phi Kappa Phi Faculty Merit Recognition Award, and To Live and Dine in LA, Menus and the Making of the Modern City. As an essayist, critic, and journalist, he has contributed to the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the American Prospect, LA Magazine, LA Weekly, and more. And they're both here to talk about Night Moves, Jessica's new book, which Emma Straub says, reads like a diary, immediate and urgent. Hopper and her friends prowl the streets of Chicago on bicycles, always moving, surrounded by both the city and a cocoon of occupied affection. It's full of music and pets and friendship, and made me feel as if the heating bills in Chicago would be worth it if one could have this sort of busy, free life. The book exists in the space between fact and fiction, between novel and memoir, but I knew right away that every word was true, and I will just say that I read it on a plane in 2 hours, and it's utterly charming. Here they are.
Hello, friends. Oh my gosh, there's so many people here. I just thought everyone would be at home getting drunk. So I appreciate you making your way out. So I wrote this book, and I'm going to read from it. It takes place between 2004 and 2008. After I left LA and moved to Chicago, and is largely about my life there as I was starting my writing career. And there's also some parts about LA, but we'll get to that. I'm just going to start with the introduction that sort of sets it. It is titled Introduction. I came back to the Midwest from LA because the penetrability of Southern California light had gotten to me. It was February 1997. I was 21. The days documented in this book begin in spring 2004, a few years into what has since become a 2-decade run in Chicago. This book is a testimony of sorts to my obsession with the city. In the early aughts, living in a series of extremely cheap and decrepit apartments on the edge of an industrial corridor, I was an unwitting participant in a wave of gentrification that has since subsumed the area. All the empty lots mentioned here are now condos. The moused-up punk houses were raised for redevelopment and now only exist in collective memory. I was not yet a professional writer, but I mapped that dream often. I was hardly ever without my friends. This is as much about their lives in that particular time and space as it is my own. Almost everyone mentioned in this book, like a half dozen of my friends, most of them are in this audience this evening. Apparently Chicago was not good enough for them. So a lot of the book is about going out at night and particularly going out on bikes. this is called There's a Light on My Bike That Never Goes Out. We were off to Edmar, which is decrepit, Polish, and smells like only old grocery stores smell. A little mildew, a little grandma cologne, and the musk of coriander. They're open till midnight and mostly sell jarred food. I got a hazelnut-ridden candy bar for $1. It was very big and thick and like those kinds that I used to sell in order to go on class trips back in junior high. In the lot, I noticed for the first time on my new/old bike that I had one of these friction light generators, same as my roommate Chris's bike. The same kind of light that just 3 minutes before I was calling magic. And voila, it turned out I had one too. I flicked the friction maker on the back into its lock spot, and with a mouthful of chocolate and a quick start, I illuminated my path into the wet Chicago night. I'm shining, I yelled to Chris, and reached out to give her a mini brick of the bar. We rode towards home, pulling the tin foil off the candy and devouring it, powering our tiny lights in tandem. Chris would just hold out her hand and say, "More." I was so happy. I was happy as I'd ever been. I told the man in the Jeep at the stop sign, "We have lights on our bikes," because I wanted him to notice and to not miss the opportunity to witness such safety and inventiveness in motion. I got all the way home, 4 blocks, and I realized I could not be home. I had to go out and power the lights some more. Every time I saw someone I knew, I stopped, offered them a square of chocolate, and showed them the glow of my new light. "See?" They would eat the treats and then head in or out of the bar door, congratulating me on my newfound luminescence. I ran into Tilo, who was going into the Kill Hannah halfway to Halloween 18+ dance party at the Nouveau Italian restaurant. She coaxed me in. Over approximately 7 minutes, I drank a water, wondered why every girl in the place thought a push-up bra/corset and underpants with pair of Skechers counted as a costume, heard the Killers for the first time, and bummed a cigarette that I only took 2 drags of from a daddy goth who rocked both a sparkly cowboy hat and Sherry Lewis's eyelashes. He called me babe and made that clicking sound like he was goddamn Telly Savalas. I checked out some asses, got back on my bike. I did not mean to stop at the bar with big open windows where everyone looks good and seems wasted, but they yelled my name, beckoned me over. They were celebrating new tattoos and 23rd birthdays and dogs they loved and drinking 2 Berlin with many small bottles of champagne. I gave them my last candy squares. Then, from around the doorway, a boy I spent 6 years with appeared. He was working the door. "You have treats?" he asked. "Nope, those were my last ones," I said. It was not supposed to be weird, but it was. I think he thought I was just being vindictive for that time he ruined 1997 through 2002. I held up the empty wrapper for evidence. "Sorry." I hopped back on my bike, waved to the faded, and floated home, my little light showing the way. I don't know if people here have been to Chicago, other than my friends who have abandoned it, but it's a grid city, and so there are certain streets that you can take that, if in taking them, you can basically see like the entire span of the city in many different neighborhoods, and this particular passage was about riding down Damon Avenue, basically, a big stretch of the city. It's called American City, I Love You Too. Since enacting my Lenten pact to only drive for work-related errands, I'm experiencing Chicago's deep, mantic powers on the daily. This is not to say that I did not love this hobbled city, potholed and blue-collared, from the moment I arrived 6 years and 3 days ago. But just that having a bike, and often on the same old route down Damon, I might as well be seeing it for the first time. All the apartments illuminated with the blue glow of TV, the living room walls gridlocked by mounted collector plates, scrubbed clean dudes in light rinsed jeans drinking beer from a can on a leather couch, viewed so easily due to the 2-story basement-to-ceiling windows in the front of their new construction condos. The patinaed crosses and gilded domes of all the bright Ukrainian churches, a dude in a red convertible Ferrari with a vanity plate reading Ferrari, holding his dick while he cruises. It's just the stuff you miss when you're in the car with B96 up too loud. On Saturday, Al and Nora, the chain-smoking young sweetness he hangs with, and I biked 14.4 miles to the Psychedelic Art Show over at Texas Ballroom in Pilsen. On the way, Nora and I chatted in the bike lane about girl stuff. On the way back, Nora lollygagged behind and I took off ahead, seeing just how fast I could go on my friend's fancy track bike. I was reenacting scenes from Breaking Away on the barren byways in the heart of Cook County at 2 a.m. on a spring Sunday. Taking Damon Avenue from one side of the town to another, you get a good span of Chicago. Something practical to counter the highlights reel of Lakeshore Drive. Damon is all that is old, burnished, and lopsided. It is profoundly comforting to live in a city that doesn't give a shit and loves you just how you are, because it is every bit as marred, bereft, and cocky as you are. We came through Pilsen strip malls, past the 24/7 donut diner, over the freeway overpass where all the trucks exit for the mills and factories, through Latino revitalization and Art Institute students tangling it up on 18th, through 9 straight blocks of taquerias and storefront churches, past bondoed cutlasses springing tinny oompa oompa bandas, and then through the 5 blocks of the tunnel underneath the train land bridge that's so strangely clean because it's so vast and so sketchy that no one walks through it, not even to tag it, which empties out into the broken cement lots and sprawling brick warehouses that once served industries that no longer exist. Past public housing bungalows isolated from their now demolished twin, the Ida B. Wells homes in Bronzeville. Past Little Italy's ass end, through the hospital campus with its wide, presidential, appellative streets of Roosevelt and Washington, Spartan gutters, into the direct arterials of downtown, past the bridge that spans I-290, through a near West Side neighborhood holding out against gentrification, past the parking lots of the United Center, trashed after the Bulls versus Golden State Warriors game hours earlier, past a long swath of empty lots and boarded up CHA low-rises, tiny mountains of debris and weedy knolls on either side of the Green Line elevated tracks, the parts of West Madison Street that have never been rebuilt since being burned in the riots. Then underneath the tracks where the best car chase in the Blues Brothers movie takes place, past 2 women singing Mary J. Blige songs together on the corner, past a gaggle of hipster friends in funny outfits, waving and hugging while exiting a square dance at open end, past the Drag City office, underneath my favorite train bridge, then 3 more blocks, where I hung a right on Ohio and rode no-handed, the last 2 blocks to my little house. I'll just read one more and then Josh and I will talk. I think, yeah. All right. Cool. This particular heat. Oh, so this is during a point in the book, it all takes place in Chicago for the most part, but during a period of time I had to come out to LA to take care of my dad for a few months, and this is what I wrote upon returning home after being away from Chicago for a few months. And no shade, LA. I used to live here. Just preemptive. Okay. This particular heat. The score upon returning home, plants dead, cats alive. Back home, I went on a long walk with JR, and then another with Ben. Big loops to get tacos and back both times. Same tacos for different people from the same place, many hours apart. Picante at 1:42 a.m. was all slobbery and slack-faced men of the office, nighted out and ousted by last call, dress shirts untucked over breakless casual pants. Their voices were loud, and their jokes were louder, and their walk was a sideways amble, like that of a cartoon animal that's been hit on the head. On the curb, some white hats and a date night woman argued. I can too. I did too know that song was Radiohead. I love Radiohead. The teasing boy replied only, I'm getting a cigarette. She yelled back, I want a cigarette too. I did too know it was Radiohead. They were standing 5 feet apart, and I was standing between them. I believed her. She was emphatic. Those boys were just ragging on her. In Chicago, you are invisible to these people unless you are DJing or they are really wasted. You are a ghost unless you are part of their crew, or at least part of their cast. The more drunk they become, the more they are aware of us scruffed up old kids. When they see you, they need to know, as if baffled by their sudden discovery, why are you eating your tacos over the trash can? Living in a city of drunk jocks will keep you punk forever. In LA, what can you rebel against? The sprawl of humanity? The zombie Pat O'Brien and the Coachella VIP? White smog skies? Desire? I miss this boisterous, insular, tiny big city. Everything is smaller than I remembered. I feared I would come home and feel dislodged and adrift, but I don't. I feel home. So I'd like to invite my friend Josh up. Hi.
Hi. What's there to rebel against in LA? Hot. Hi, everybody. That was fantastic.
Hey, thanks.
It's
Thanks
so
for
fun
coming.
So fun to be here with you and talk in public in front of people instead of just to each other. So today was a long day that contained lots of other long days.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of other long years, and I was thinking about this book today, in part because I knew I was going to be talking to you tonight. But
prepared.
Yeah, thank you. Look it. Post-its.
Oh, shit, dude.
That's right. That's
Well, you're an academic. Like, you can't read a book without doing that, probably.
You can't. No. And there, among the many things that I'm sure we can talk about, either here or after or tomorrow or ongoing, about what so many people felt today watching this spectacle, was a sense of kind of claustrophobia would be one feeling that I was feeling, of the way that the air seemed to be sucked out of that room, and she was unable to be herself and be free in the context of all of the men who were around her. It was a display of unfreedom, among other things. And there was a couple moments. This whole book, for those of you who haven't read it, has this. It just vibrates with freedom. That there's a sense of movement that we heard, in Emma Straub's comment. But the fact that you're on bikes, that you're on the streets, that you're outside, so often, that was in a way in stark contrast to the suffocation on display today. But there's a couple of passages that I thought maybe we'd start with that. On 121, on page 121. Everyone turns your books. Sorry.
The professor
That's
is
just
in the
like
house.
so autopilot. The passage where you're talking about the crotch.
Oh, yeah. It's a location?
Yes. It was
In the
capitalized.
city.
It was
In the
capitalized.
city.
I assumed it was a location. It was capitalized.
There's a map at the front of the book. It's if people have been to Chicago, it's sort of the center of. There's so many Chicagoans here. I basically don't need to explain that. But it's an intersection where there's that is sort of the center of the little sort of hipster borough that I live in closest proximity to, is called the Crotch.
Okay. That just starts the paragraph. I wasn't really going to focus on the crotch. But exiting the Walgreens, a young lady with a skater bangs mohawk walked past me and smiled a huge giddy smile. Her shirt read, "I fucked your boyfriend," in old English lettering. Sometimes I feel like the world is coarsening faster than I can handle. That last
Still feel that way?
line, yeah, but it's a really heavy line. Could you talk a little bit about that, of the world coarsening?
I think in some ways that line distinguishes the time in my life where this book takes place. I think around that time, this book starts when I'm about 27, 28, and so I'm kind of in the twilight of my, sort of carefree 20s and toddling into like, I'm a person with a career, and kind of maybe in the distance I can see like a horizon of adulthood, and sort of starting to, not that I was like, not that my punkness was lessening or anything, but like, that like maybe there was kind of like a weight of the world, because I think as I was getting older, in some ways I feel like my empathy was broadening and just sort of gaining greater traction in the world, that maybe my heart was softening a little bit. And I think that's sort of where that I don't know, burgeoning maturity came out of. I don't know, was kind of particular to that time.
That choice of word there just seems like a very prophetic choice of that word. Because it's a
I am an oracle. So.
You are, it's true. But that the coarsening of speech, of discourse, of responsibility, that we're living, obviously, in very powerful ways right now. And then later you kind of do a little dance with Carl Sandburg.
Does everyone know Carl Sandburg's work? He's sort of a very famous, he's sort of, City of Big Shoulders is like his coinage, but like he's very much like a very Chicago identified poet, but he has been dead for like probably 100 years.
Yeah.
Little guy with a bow tie and a walleye. He's great.
Who also, had some reputation of being a kind of people's poet, of representing the people's
very
voice.
Much so.
And you talk about that he was the king of what you call tough rhetoricals.
Did I say that?
Yeah, tough rhetoricals seem to be his forte. But TUFF, because it's a Hopper book. And you're talking about his poem Gone. I feel like you're looking at me like, I can't believe you actually read my book. That's the look you're giving me. Okay. Where you said from his poem Gone, which you cite, you say, so from him, so we all love a wild girl keeping a hold on a dream she wants. And you say there's an entire summer in those lines, exclamation point, which ends on a light note, but there's again a heaviness in that I couldn't help but read in light of the moment we're living in.
I don't say at that time I was like new to poetry, but maybe a little bit more than, maybe about 15 years ago, around the time that this book starts, I started reading a lot of poetry, but I really, my best friend JR, who is a heavy character in the book, worked at still works at a great bookstore in Chicago, but he really helped foster my like deepening, like just like a growing hunger for Chicago history, and also Chicago literature, and basically like I was so excited to kind of connect with that lineage of the city that seemed like my curiosity for the city was like inexhaustible. Like there was no way to exhaust it within the city, and finding these things in Sandburg's work, and Gwendolyn Brooks' work, in the Neon Wilderness, some of the famous Chicago literature, and going, it wasn't just like, oh, some of these things take place where I am, or these streets that I'm biking down at night, but to connect with like really that's a deeper spiritual kinship with the city, and I think that really. There was so much to fall in love with there, both in the literature of the city and the city itself, and so it was all kind of mixed together for me, I think.
And this idea of a wild girl, what does that mean to you?
All my best friends have always been cool, wild girls. That's always what I wanted to be, but I think I was always working too much. I think. What is a wild girl? For me it was always like I just have always had to, there's like some of my great friends who I identify as like the great wild girls of my life.
Raise your hands.
Okay, Liz, put up your hand. Dylan, put up your hand. Morgan, Yossi. Okay, everybody Mukta too. But the vibrancy of, in particular some women who were very much like, had heavy presence in my life, particularly my young life, very much informed me, because I think lots of times early on, particularly when I was a young woman in music, I knew I was in such spaces that were like just mediated by their maleness and the patriarchy, and I was so aware of there was a privilege of being in that space, but there was also, to be in that space, you had to be the right kind of girl, and to have certain sort of power and currency, you definitely couldn't be a wild girl. You had to be, a certain kind of way, and I think I spent like a solid decade sort of being like performatively like, I am the right kind of woman, and I have the right kind of ambition to be in this space, and it took me a long time to sort of disentangle from that. And perhaps evolve into my wild girl self at 42. I don't know. Wild old girl.
Is that a thread, though, that you think you could trace throughout your music journalism and your work with?
I think so now. I mean, it's something that particularly in, the last year or so has really hit home for me, just the ways that, this sounds like, well, it's as heavy as I mean it, like that I was complicit in my own kind of just subverting myself and the ways that shows up in some of my earlier writing of trying to show that I was like really trying to underscore my authority and really stake out some space in music because of the constant sense of challenge to me even being there.
Right. I was struck knowing your history and knowing your writing previously and then coming to this book. I was surprised how central your companions in wildness and freedom were not women, but were guys.
Well, one of the people in the book I'm now married to. So, but my, kind of in the back of my mind when I finally put the whole book together with my editor Naomi, I was like, oh, this book is my memoir, but it's also like a biography of my friend JR, because I don't think I did anything without him. Like, he's almost on every single page of the book because we're just constant companions. But in many ways, that was also, if I had framed the book in like different time frames, I've been a little bit more concerned with other things. But he was very much my guide and in my love of Chicago. And someone who really enriched my understanding and knowledge of the city, and so because it's so focused on Chicago, and also because it's just about going out at night. So, that's what we did, kind of pre having our lives so heavily mediated by social media.
Right.
We went out with each other in public all the time.
What?
It was what?
What was that like?
But yeah, so it's one of the really funny things about now that the book's out and talking to my friends who are in it is sort of this sort of like Rashomon of all of our memories together, where like they're like, but do you remember what happened after that part that night? And I was like, no, I don't remember it unless I wrote it down in this book, basically, and just piecing together everybody's memories of people going, I straight up don't remember this, and just getting like a wider sort of blueprint of our kind of collective life, of the organism of our social scene.
So maybe I'll go further on the male friendship part, because I thought it's really interesting also as a book about your friendship with these guys. Like, what role did the male friendships that you had in this period play on like the forging of your, for lack of a better term, feminist consciousness as a music writer?
I don't know. I don't know if it did, other than my male friends were as nerdy as I was about stuff, and so as documented in the book, like we just spent a whole night walking around talking about Husker Du, and so I'm from Minneapolis. It's just it's like literally it's like your birthright, I guess. It is endowed upon you. But that they were people that I first and foremost connected with in that way, and then also we worked on fanzines together and did different things, or had DJ nights together. But I think in that way that's how they informed my writing. But I don't know if they're them being dudes necessarily, because they were generally cool and understanding. So I wasn't rebelling against them.
Right. Okay, so Los Angeles. I just want to say on behalf of people from Los Angeles that this book actually restored my belief that LA is the center of the world, because this is like a book about Chicago and Chicago and Chicago and Chicago, and the first sentence is Los Angeles. We win every time. But you do have, like, LA is a character in this book. I mean, a constant, I know you mentioned it a little bit, but like there's that one.
Is this one about the dogs?
Oh, wait, I don't... No, it was the one with when you kind of get into X's Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah. The day that I'm leaving.
Yeah. To steal from John and Exene, I'm not buying a lamp on Hollywood Boulevard. The day I leave, but it does feel sad, sort of, almost, not really. I'm coming home soon, I think. California's skim milk skies. Yeah, trademark that one. California's skim milk skies will still hang heavy over the 5, whether I'm here to witness or no. I mean, talk to us more about your love-hate with Los Angeles. If that, maybe that's not correct.
No. I mean, it's not. It's more like a love apathy.
That's even worse.
I mean, so I moved to I grew up in Minneapolis, and then I moved here when I was 17 and lived here until I was about almost 21. And I moved here because I was like, well, I'd had every job I could possibly have in Minneapolis that had to do with music, and I was like, I'm gonna go work with music, and got to LA, and I got a job at Aaron's Records when I came out here. If anyone is old enough to remember that, okay, I was like 4.
Many of us.
And started working in music out here, and started playing in bands, and was pretty psyched on it here. But what I really liked about it, because Minneapolis was like a very small pond, it's like I could come out here and just basically like dissolve in the city. I could be totally anonymous. I could be historically it's a place of self-invention, and that's very much what I did here, and that's another book. But like I came out here, and I found some really good friends, and Jabberjaw was really like my home. If folks remember, that was all ages venue that was very important early on in LA. Don't mean to womansplain you, but if you already know. And I'd been here about 3 years, and was playing in bands and doing fanzine, and Jabberjaw closed. And right about that same time, I got my fake ID confiscated at what was then Spaceland. Said I was 5'6", and which is taller than I am by several inches. That I was about 25 pounds heavier than I am now, and that I was from the Valley, and so it was wrong on all accounts. And all of a sudden I couldn't see shows, and that was so at 20, 21. I mean, that was my everything. And so I went home to Minneapolis for Christmas, and a friend was like, "Oh, come to Chicago with me." And I went down there. It was like 12 hours later. I was like, "I'm moving here. This is my place. I found my place." And it was a place that was very at that time, 1996, 97, really happening for all the different musics I cared about, whether it was like free jazz or hardcore. And I went there, and that was also a place where I could really express my ambition for all the things I wanted to do, because I found at the time when I was here in LA, I think it's a much different place now culturally, but especially working in music, I would say, "Oh, this is what I do, blah, blah, blah," and people would be like, "Well, what do you really want to do?" And I'd be like, "Well, I want to have my fanzine and work with all these indie bands." And they're like, "But like, don't you want to go work at a label or something else?" Like as if this wasn't like a big enough dream to run your own company or do a magazine or something. And so, but it was very much a place for me of I could come here and invent who I wanted to be, and it wasn't defined by the history of who I was in Minneapolis or other places. And so then I moved to Chicago. But LA was hugely foundational for me.
It's okay. I didn't need you to land there. Yeah, we still like you. Yeah. So you mentioned in one of the pieces you read at the beginning, you alluded to kind of the shadow or cloud of gentrification in Chicago, and so much of this book is a document of, as you said, places that are gone, but also kind of feelings that maybe are gone that are linked to those places, or relationships to zines, to clubs, to a kind of independent music spirit, whatever it is. Even the recurring images of being on a bike, moving freely through a city. How much do you see that period and the work that you were doing on the independent side as, in fact, being part of gentrification? I mean, this is something
100%.
that lots of people are coming to grips with, right?
I mean, 100%, and we knew it at the time. We knew it at the time. I don't think we, I guess being like kind of a collective creative class, a lot of my friends were newly out of school, or they were coming to Chicago to establish their bands or their art practice, or whatever it was, and we were just living wherever we were living without much regard for literally our footprint in the city. And but I knew really early on that, because every place I would, like a couple of places where I lived, we were pushed out. Literally, they're demolished for $1 million condos. Like, it's so cliche, So I knew that, and that kept happening. So it's like I knew, like, we are a force that's bringing this as part of it, and you couldn't deny it. That it was like the sort of transactional space of a white artistic class, essentially. And so, I don't know what I could necessarily do differently going back in time and still living in those spaces. But I live in the suburbs now, and there's nothing to gentrify, so I'm kind of do no harm. But yeah, I mean, it was very, in that gentrification, it wasn't just the aspects of like community that was getting steamrolled, like the wider community, like in particular, I was living in like a Ukrainian Polish neighborhood that's still largely intact. Though I was part of a gentrification wave that then 20 years later, I was priced out by something that I had initiated. Right. So I was very aware of having space within that cycle.
So part of that shift also, as you mentioned a second ago, is kind of the move from indie arts and indie music practices into the creative industries. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, we're old enough to remember when being creative wasn't an industry or an economy.
You could, like, right. I tried to explain to you, like, when I was coming up, there was like maybe four jobs in music journalism. Like, it wasn't ever a thing that you're like, and this will turn into a job eventually. Right. There wasn't that. I didn't.
Or that job would turn into a design job.
Or anything.
Yeah. Or marketing.
Or content.
Exactly.
Love some content.
Exactly. So let's talk about this. But there was one little detail that I thought was at least a little hint of this. That was about one of your friends who might be here. Miles. Is Miles here?
No.
Okay. Despite the fact that his writing is just unbeatable, Miles, along with several of my good friends, works in the young trend department at H&M. So I didn't even know there was a young trend department. So that's
I think they've since done
away
with it. I think it's just all one big gross.
We're all young trend. Yeah, on and off. So your own career, you haven't ended up in H&M.
Not yet.
Not yet. There is hope.
It's only Thursday.
But your career has taken you lots of different kinds of places. Mm-hmm. And you've worked as a writer for independent weeklies, for zines, a writer for what are now more corporate magazines, mm-hmm. But have also worked at MTV, recently at Spotify. Mm-hmm. Could you talk about those negotiations in your own life, about moving between all those spaces?
Yeah, I didn't ever anticipate, I didn't get a job till I was 38, and so working at a job it was a new skill that I had to acquire, not to be all LinkedIn about it, but I didn't think I was someone who could exist in those spaces, and I worked at Pitchfork for a while, and that was sort of one particular kind of space. I was running a magazine. I was kind of a natural step up from like the fanzine world that I came through, and then MTV News was its own magical space and time. And then some of the more like corporate things that I've done since then were like almost like experiments for me, because I was like, oh, like this is just another skill. And for me, those negotiations, I think, were less had to do with like writing or kind of my, I don't say like my ethical or moral center, but had to do more with growing up and being a Montessori kid and just being like, I'm curious about something, so I do it. but did 20-year-old, 22-year-old me that was like, nothing but judgment about other people's, what counted as being a sellout and not, I mean, certainly that lessens over time, but it just, I think young me would have been surprised that I worked for anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
I do like Montessori as the rationale for things. You can hold on to that just a little bit longer.
But that's, I went to Montessori until I was in 8th grade, and it really is like, you learn by doing it if you're curious about something. And I didn't go to college, and so it was like most of my adult life I think has been kind of just seeking my own education,
Did working for MTV News and working for Spotify change the way you thought about music culture?
Working at MTV News changed how I thought about a lot of things, but about writing and about writing community. Working at Spotify did not.
In either direction?
No.
Apathy? Something like that?
It's a multi-page NDA,
Well played, yes. Well, the MTV News moment, maybe we should talk about it a little, because I think it's also...
MTV News in the house, over here, in that aisle.
Was also a really important time, obviously in the kind of shifting plates of journalism.
The pivoting of journalism is what we're doing?
Yeah, exactly. And your kind of overt attempt to create a community of writers that looked like a community of writers that few other places had. And could you talk about that kind of agenda for you?
Might cry. After I did this book, it's very show and tell. After I did this book, and had kind of gone, after I did that book and had reread everything I'd ever written and published, 20 years of my work, I was like pretty exhausted by my own voice, but also felt like I had taken a lot of my early theories to like their logical extension point, and I just wanted to edit. And part of the reason I wanted to edit was to give people, use what power I had to give other people the opportunities that I had coming up that I could see were like almost non-existent, and to do what I could to basically elevate that. And that was very much part of my feminist agenda, just to make music writing more inclusive, because that's just what I wanted. I mean, that's just what I wanted as a reader. I grew up a surly, little riot girl rejecting the canon, and so that part is still very much intact in me as an editor.
And is that also, I assume, transferring into the book you're writing now, and working on now? Can we talk about that?
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's still in proposal.
The concept?
Yeah, I'm working on a book about women in 1975 and about women in music in 1975 and kind of locating that time and place as a, I don't want to say birth of women in rock because it spans all sorts of things, but really women writing songs about their own lives, and those songs becoming hits, and that's really kind of the first time you really see that happening.
And you also explored that in a different way with the most recent Rolling Stone piece, or
yes.
I don't know if it's most recent, but recent Rolling Stone piece.
I don't know if everybody read that, but it was...
It's a must-read if you haven't. Fantastic piece.
I read, there's a biography of Jan Wenner that came out last year, and about the whole arc of Rolling Stone, and I was somewhere like around, page like 350, there's like this mention, it's like, it's Total Boys Club, and the women there had it said a club for mutual aid and support, and I was like, what the fuck does that mean? And so I found these women, and I was like, tell me about your club. They're like, it wasn't a club, it was a feminist consciousness raising group, and every single woman that worked at Rolling Stone was in it. And I was like, oh, despite the fact that this is something that I've cared about so deeply for literally my entire life, I had no idea about this. And so it felt very important to me to be like, if I don't know this story, then like nobody knows this story. And so I did this oral history of the first 5 women to be on the editorial masthead at Rolling Stone, whose work had been just uniformly erased. And as I was in the middle of writing that story, the day before I was supposed to interview one of the women, she died. And it just was like, it just felt that much more urgent, like, okay, we don't know what her experience was, you know, and it's just gone. And she was like the longest running female editor at Rolling Stone, you know. So those sort of histories, particularly now that I'm getting a little bit older and I see the work of different writers, not just female writers, being erased, or things being, people who are really iconic to me being left out because of the digital divide. You know, the critic that was so formative to me, this woman Terry Sutton, who was the pop critic or the music critic at City Pages, the alt weekly where I was growing up, because it's pre-digital age, and I just thought every city had like a female pop critic at the paper, and I just thought that was something to do. It turns out she was like literally the one, but that gave me the idea that I could do this, and I'd send people to go find her clips, and they're like, oh, I can only find like a couple things, and it's just not archived, and it's just like, okay, I'm gonna have to put out that book, you know.
And it's got to be somewhat true for alt weeklies, not across the country, but key markets. I mean, San Francisco. I mean, the Bay Guardian had major women critics writing. Boston Phoenix, those boys, obviously. That there's a whole kind of ecology.
That it's like you lose major, like you lose your lineage.
Yeah.
So this is uplifting.
So I was going to say, no, I'm ready. I'm going to end.
Here we are at journalism's wake. Thank you,
my last question. Here's my last question, and then let's open it up. But kind of early on in this book, and it really is. Do people have it yet? People read it yet?
There's like
you will
100 copies.
Go buy them. Buy it. Because it really is. I'm focusing on certain kind of content point bits, but the writing in it is incredibly lively, and also just so. And I've read you for so long that it's nice to actually realize that writers you follow have all these different possibilities in their writing, and that you
this
can
is
see that in different ways.
my natural voice.
It's your natural voice. Well, your natural voice is super funny, and also you capture time and place just beautifully. You heard it in some of the opening pieces, the attention to detail. But let me just end by asking you about this. There's a moment early on where you're talking about the importance of riding bicycles. But what I know, in Chicago, a bike is faster than a car. And so I'm seeing what happens now, seeing what happens when I commit to becoming a non-driver. Because at a certain point, the question becomes, if I'm not living my most hopeful politics at the advanced age of 29, then what am I doing?
You better believe that when I came across it for the first time in the manuscript, it was like having a brick dropped on my head. It was like, oh, wow. Putting this book together helped me get so much more deeply in touch with like the reasons why I write, and how much the things that I believe in the world come into my critical framework. And it was really energizing in a time that I needed it. For a couple of years I was editing, and I have a really hard time writing and editing at the same time, and or just even like I can only think with my editor brain, and so I hadn't written in like almost like 3 years until quite recently, maybe close to 4 years, and I thought I kind of believed that maybe I was done writing, and maybe I'd like said everything I needed to say, and I was just, maybe I should go do something else, which is like so wild how my brain can trick me. It's like, this is literally my only marketable skill. I don't know what I was going to do. And that, reading that when just my first pass on editing the book, it was absolutely responsible for sort of drawing me back in and reminding me that this is that my writing is a place where I can absolutely put my politics and my hope. That really sounded like a soundbite. No one's asking about that.
Really great. It's a great soundbite. Questions, comments? People who want to dispute what happened, who were there? Defenses of LA.
No, I'll comment. Thank you for giving us your politics, your help, especially on a night like tonight. We're really grateful.
Thank you.
We need people like you more of you, and you just create them wherever you go. And that seems to be kind of what you're doing with the message. So thank you.
I have created 2 people.
Oh, look at me. I'm literally running this like class. Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming. I moved here from Chicago too, so I'm really excited to book. But was there anybody, maybe any woman here in LA during your time that you wish that you'd been able to investigate more or interview or a story or something here that you think maybe somebody else should?
Ooh. I mean, I would say Alice Bag, but Alice Bag has her own book. So, like, everyone investigate Alice Bag. I mean, I think there's so many. One thing that I am pretty aware of, like, in terms of LA history, is that sometimes there's, women who are very clearly behind the scenes, who are people who are, whether they were, like, promoters or things like that I think are always important to investigate. And, crucial women that ran venues early on. But I think the main thing that I think about when you ask that question is, as you may know, almost like every history of punk is basically like the same 7 or 12 talking head dudes. I hope Henry Rollins isn't here. But that it's always like kind of the same, and it was like this, and it's like we really only kind of have those accounts. And there's some decent like oral histories where we kind of work people in, but it's like I really want to know what LA was like. I want like the story of like the first year of the Go-Go's, and some other things where you're like, shouldn't we have that book? And we just don't. And so I mean, I think there's so much space to excavate around that. I think it's that's sort of where my brain goes with that. But that's a good question. Thank you.
And I would add to that, we need a huge study of Black women in LA gospel. Like way back, like founding pioneering figures in gospel music in Los Angeles were all women. As music publishers, as singers, as instrumentalists.
I feel like you could have like 12. You know so much more about LA music history than I do. You could just keep going. Give some assignments. Give us some homework.
No, we'll leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah. Other question? Yeah.
I'm just curious. Punk Planet was such a great magazine to me, and I'm wondering, like, was it great to you as well? Like, to me, it was like the New Yorker for punks. It was like we had our MRR and our Flipside and other kind of like zine kind of things, but Punk Planet actually like really went for more quality, whatever that means. But
Just the quality in quotes.
Yeah. But I was wondering, like, what your feelings about Punk Planet.
Punk Planet was good to me. I earned $8 an hour being the subscriptions person for like a year. But Punk Planet was great for me first as a reader, but then was one of the reasons that I wanted to move to Chicago, because I kept reading about the Fireside Bowl in there, and I was like, these bills are crazy. How are these bands all playing together? And but also one of the great things about Punk Planet, I think it was very much influenced particularly by Riot Grrrl, and that it was very influenced by Fugazi, and so its idea of what was punk in Punk Planet was really expansive and really sought to be sort of inclusive, what counted as inclusive in punk at that time. And so for me that was, but being able to have a column there, that was the first time I ever wrote reviews that weren't basically like, this band is trash. Like writing, the first thing that I ever wrote that was like an essay was a column there called that is called the Emo Where the Girls Aren't. That's an essay in there that sort of seminal work of mine. I don't know. But that I had this space to do that, and that it was, pre-digital era. I mean, like, if you were in a band, if you were in these scenes, if you were part of that world, everyone read it. And so it was an incredible way to distribute my opinion. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have what may or may not be relevant to this immediate discussion, but I left Chicago about the same time you arrived. So I left in '95, and that was like the halcyon days of Liz Fair being torn apart by every dude, George Overkill, like pro indie, MAGA Carta coming down. What's it like now? Because I was there as like a young queer kid in the punk industrial scene. I had my own experiences that I've talked about, but I remember all too well what that was like. I'm just curious if you have a beat on like how the kids of Chicago are today. Like what the scene is.
Are they all right?
Are they all right?
From my perch in the suburbs, everything seems fine. I think, one of the reasons I really like living in Chicago is that it is still a space where kids in the Midwest still move. It's still like the jump up from Louisville or, Madison or whatever. And so it is a place that is, there's a constant crop between that and School of the Art Institute and how vibrant the hip-hop scene is right now. There's constantly a crop of young people coming into the city and like renewing it with their ambition and their ideas. And I think right now the things that are really exciting are a lot of the people who have come out of YCA, Young Chicago Authors, and the poetry scene in particular is, I think, what makes the hip-hop scene that's coming out of it like so fucking exciting. And I think that's the best music in Chicago basically right now. But there's also like a really awesome kind of extreme synth noise terror scene that is dominated by young queer women and women of color, which is like, yes, like that's what I was waiting for like 20 years. So there's a lot of things that are really exciting there. I wish there was more all ages space and more house shows and venues, but a lot of those have also been swallowed up, and there's a lot of people who are trying to get like a real all ages community safe space off the ground, and it's been like 3 years, and it's a real struggle. So I'm hoping some of those things sort of coalesce. But right now, the thing that I pay the most attention to is kind of this girl noise scene and the poetry scene coming out of YCA.
I'm not really familiar with the geography of Chicago, but I hear like it's violent, a lot of is that totally separate from where you guys hang out, or is that?
I mean, Chicago is historically like the most segregated city in America, and it's huge. And I think, there's many different Chicagos. The Chicago that is my Chicago is not the same for anybody who even would live 2 neighborhoods away, let alone on the far west side or the far south side. And so, Chicago, I think, is such a culturally rich city in so many different ways, but it's also a city that's incredibly stratified. And so much like the rest of America, but in some really extreme ways, the people who are living in poverty are basically, criminalized and really shuttered to a part of the city. And then people who have, a modicum of wealth lead really different lives in the same city. And so there's that. But that, it's still just a really, in spite of all of the things that hang over Chicago. And one of the things that I have always really loved about it, but in different ways, sometimes love, hate, is like the brokenness of the city, which, it's funny to read about it in books. Not funny, it's not funny. But reading about it in historic Chicago works of literature or, Studs Terkel Division Street, and you're like, this city's been fucked since the jump. This is a really just historically corrupt, messed up city, but it's also a city where it's still pretty affordable to live, and it's it's just always been a city where people have come to make things and can really have an independent vision and build something themselves. So I think it's still a really amazing city.
So it's not like Manhattan, where like nobody lives there, everybody has to move to Jersey or something.
I mean, gentrification is happening everywhere. I mean, a lot of people I know are like, well, if I'm going to pay this much for rent, might as well move to LA or New York. I mean, that's definitely something that's happened.
We're aware of this.
We're out here decimating your water table.
That's right. I think this is on that note, I like ending on a good water table line. So is Nicole. Everyone needs to go buy this book, get it signed, come hang out, tell stories. Thank you all for coming. Jessica, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you for coming.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.